y'all doing? Thanks for having me today. I better start with the story. I've got to lighten you guys up a little bit. Great crowd, but I always like, to make sure everybody's feeling a little bit of sympathy for me in case I flop at some point. Get y'all nice and comfortable and sympathetic towards me. I've spoken in front of a lot of big crowds. Crowds this size, phenomenal crowds like this, but crowds of even a couple thousand. But I want to tell you about a moment that still sends shockwaves through me. And it was a crowd of about 12 or 15. It was one of the most intense, disciplined, hyperactive, and angry crowds I've ever dealt with. My wife and I taught 5-year-olds in Sunday school. It was a Sunday, and I remember it. It's etched in my brain. I was delivering one of the most outstanding deliveries of the parable of the 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Everybody know it? I was on that day. Oh, you should have seen it. Books will be written about my delivery that day. And I got about in the middle, and this little guy named Alex, he's sitting right about where you are. Alex is just staring at me. And then he goes into action. His hand goes up. He starts waving. Now, I know at that point, with 5-year-olds, there's one of 2 things going on. Either they've got a question or they need to go to the bathroom. So I took care of the bathroom issue and said, man, if you have a question, I'm going to get to you at the end, okay? I nodded to him. He nods back at me. We're good. About 20 seconds later, Alex's hand shoots up once again. We go through the same drill. Buddy, I'm going to get to your question in just a minute, okay? All right. This goes on 3 or 4 more times. Hand up, question asked. We cover it. Alex, I'll get to you when we're done. So I finally finish. Minds had been shaped that day. I had done a great job. I look at Alex and say, buddy, I know you've been waiting a long time. What's your question? He stands up, looks me in the eye, and says, why is your head so big? It was at that point that I realized for all future presentations, I'm going to let you know that I will take questions at the end of this, but be nice to the speaker, would you? So I'm going to be talking to you today about toxic situations. Sounds like a fun speech, right? Probably a good story behind it, huh? You'll hear a little bit more about that. But let me just get a feel of the crowd. How many people have been, and I'm protecting all the innocent because y'all may be sitting next to your boss or a partner or something like that. How many of y'all are working or have worked in a great culture today in your jobs? Okay, excellent. How many of y'all are working with great people or have worked with great people? All right, good numbers. How many of y'all have a friend or have worked in a toxic culture? All right. And how many have worked with really toxic and destructive people? A lot of people. Let me tell you a story. It was a beautiful Monday morning. I'll never forget it. The birds were singing, the sun was shining. I was starting a new job. This job offered outstanding benefits, fantastic pay. I was going to build relationships that I had never had a chance to build before. It was going to be the next step in what had been a very successful career. And I walked in that day, and things, just as you'd expect, were happening. I was meeting new people coming up, making the casual introductions as you might expect. But within about 2 minutes, right about the time I found where my office was, things began to get a little strange. People were coming up to me and saying hello, but with the hellos came other things. First one right out of the box, Pete, good to meet you. I'm praying for you. Now, I believe in the power of prayer, but it's a little strange and a little uncomfortable when you believe they have something in mind right off the bat at work. And Pete, what have they told you exactly about your job? Again, somebody knows something and the answer is not me. And then, of course, one of my favorites was, if you ever need to talk, we'll go for coffee. The whispering, the secrecy. And I began to wonder whether there had been news about me being diagnosed with a fatal disease, and everyone knew except I did. The day would carry on, mind you, first day in the job, and I get called down to meet with the CEO. That's pretty good, right? And I was joining a new organization. I'm a lobbyist by trade, spent most of my time working for big organizations like the U.S. Chamber. By the way, congratulations on your accreditation from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Y'all are an awesome organization. But I'd spent my career in politics. I'd spent my career on Capitol Hill and in Austin. I'm a pretty sharp guy when it comes to politics. I can read people really well. But I had never seen the reading of people that I needed to do in this job. So I found myself down at the CEO's office. I call him Cecil in my book. He invites me in, sits me down, and begins with an interesting comment that should never be the lead for any type of onboarding meeting. Pete, I probably should have told you all of this before you took the job, but I don't think you'd be here today. I need to tell you about your coworker. Her name is Hazel. And ladies, here's the disclaimer. Men are just as disruptive and even more problematic than any woman. So that's my disclaimer. But he said about Hazel. Now, she's filed about 30 different complaints against people in the organization, has threatened several lawsuits. She has sabotaged a lot of people's work. And as you know, we've given you most of Hazel's job. She's probably coming after you next. Welcome to the firm. It was a phenomenal speech. And so Cecil went on, and as if he needed to do this, said, I don't know if I was clear. Let me tell you a little story. There was a volunteer fire department down in Florida, and they had had a rash of fires in their community. Normally, there had been 15 or 20 fires that were taking place throughout the year, and that year, there had been 60 or 70 popping up. It was disturbing to the people around that county, and they began to do some investigation, wondering, what was happening? Was it climate change? Was it, were people not disposing of flammables in the right way? That type of thing. So they began to do some investigation, and they found, and this won't surprise you, that some of these fires were man-made. And they got to the bottom of it, and after quite a bit of looking around, realized it was the volunteer fire department that was starting the fires. It began with a need for more equipment. And people thought to themselves, if we don't have enough fires, they're never going to give us a new truck. Once some of the guys heard that, others said, you know what? I've got a buddy whose business is going south. I bet he wouldn't mind if we start one there, get the insurance check. Others had some friends they didn't like. Let me burn down the shed in his backyard and we can get out there and it'll count as another run of the trucks. And then others just enjoyed burning stuff up. Well, Cecil got to the end of his story and leaned over, and I was in a state of confusion or shock at this point. And he said, so Pete, to sum it up, that's Hazel. And he was right. And I said, so I'm working with an arsonist. And he said, yeah, she's our arsonist in the office, but good news is you've always gotten along with everybody. Bad news is we've determined that we can't fire her. And that, for the first time in my life, after working with some outstanding organizations, I found myself realizing what failed leadership looks like, a failed culture looks like, organization that was afraid of its shadow. My next meeting was teed up with my supervisor, who began, as any normal meeting would begin, in that office with a reiteration of what I had been told, but my new supervisor bursting into tears, telling me that she was terrified of Hazel, that Hazel had sabotaged her work before, and that she didn't want to be handed the responsibilities, but she was going to have to deal with it anyway. Well, that doesn't happen too often. I never had anybody cry in any meeting that I had been involved in, but it began to paint the picture for me. Over the next few years, and in my book, I tell the story of what it was like going through that process, through failed cultures. I learned a lot. And there was the story of having our administrative assistant being hired. Lovely woman named Alice. Alice came in, and she had been brought on. We co-interviewed her. Hazel was Alice's supervisor as well. I did part of the supervising. And going into a very busy congressional session, Hazel decided that the best way to undercut me would be to eliminate Alice. And so she began filing things with our Human Resources Department, saying that Alice was late. Alice did terrible work. Alice was a scourge to society. None of it was true, but sometimes in a culture that's compromised itself, truth, ethics may not matter because the organization has decided it has other priorities in order. And so during that time, I've got to tell you, Alice's attendance at work was slipping. She was coming in late every once in a while. The reason was pretty understandable. Her parent was on their deathbed. And it was right about that time when things were getting very difficult for Alice. The head of my Human Resources Department came in and said, well, Alice has got to go. I was in shock. As all of us, we love our coworkers. We love most of them. And was absolutely stunned at what I was witnessing. And I said, you were well aware of Alice's challenges. Her dad is about to pass away. And he said, I really don't have a choice here. And he told me that, well, he had human resources problems too. It's not a good problem to have when your HR department needs an HR department. And I watched as the organization that day, because our human resources department had been compromised, that they let somebody go that not only was a good employee, but for all the wrong reasons. You see, they had made some decisions that started with excusing bad behavior in one area, and it led to another and another. And much like as we remember during the times when we were on the playground or any other point in life, schoolyard, in business, you excuse one thing, and it may be for good reasons. It may start with so-and-so is bringing in a lot of money to the firm. We don't want to mess with that. And so management looks the other way. Or, you know what? When I've moved this up the food chain to some people higher up in the organization, nothing happens. It's just a headache for me. So I'm not going to deal with that issue. Or the organization becomes so compromised and so many people are doing so many things wrong that it's tough to stop. So what I found myself in was about the most perfect storm imaginable of a toxic situation. And in the end, ultimately, I found myself having not only watched what happened with Alice, but projects being sabotaged, other people being shot at in the organization, things where our clients, if Hazel didn't like someone, their work was being blown up, clients' work was being trampled on, but a management that was watching all of this take place. I got through all of that, and I thought, you know what? And some of you probably know people that have found themselves in this position. They found themselves thinking, I don't know if I can work here anymore. I've got to say something because this isn't right or this needs to be addressed. And I remember my wife coming to me one day, and she said, I've got to tell you something. And she came up to me, and we sat down, and she went on to tell me that my colleague, Hazel, had approached her. Outside of they didn't know each other, but she had confronted my wife over the fact that I was within this firm, and I found myself at a point where I wasn't quite sure whether I needed a restraining order or I needed a meeting with HR. And I went to my organization and said, guys, I've endured quite a bit here with Hazel. Y'all need to address this one, don't you? And they said, well, let's stew on that. We need to think about what we're going to do here. And you start hearing the hemming and hawing and what can we do? This is a toughie. Maybe she was just, this is what constituent service looks like, helping out, meeting new people. And I found myself about 2 weeks later being called into an office and told I didn't have a job anymore. And I was handed a severance package. Now, I will tell you shortly the beauty of that moment, but again, it hammered in for me how, really two things. One, what happens when an organization loses its way, but two, when good people, and I believe most of the people within that organization were fine people, but they were choosing leadership and management as a secondary thing to their self-preservation or to the most expedient thing that they could do. And so I lost my job that day. Now, that wasn't a whole lot of fun. I've had better days than that. But what I found from that was a pretty amazing opportunity. Number one, I learned a lot about office politics. I knew electoral politics. I knew how to read people. I could go into any meeting with a legislator and have an excellent idea of how it was going to break down. Knew how every coalition would come together in a legislative process. I knew a whole lot of things that, frankly, a lot of people that haven't been in that world didn't know. I was the guy that got along with just about everybody and could understand just about everyone's viewpoint. But I found myself in a situation that I did not know, and that was finding yourself in a dysfunctional culture, dealing with dysfunctional people. And so I sat down, and while I was looking for a job, got to put food on the table, found myself with a real opportunity. And out of difficult times can come some amazing things. I found myself having that information that I firmly believed could change some lives, could change some businesses' trajectories, and truly change some cultures and some people for the better. And I began putting together my book. It's called The Arsonist in the Office. And I found myself having an amazing opportunity and suddenly an amazing passion for simply urging businesses to do what's right and to do the thing that people know in their gut that they need to do, standing for principles that they know they need to stand for, doing things which are pretty intuitive in terms of just simply sticking to your mission, honoring your cultural values, and things like that. And so I began to put together this book as a passion of mine. And I learned very quickly these are some things that not everyone knows. Not everything was fully intuitive to people. But I quickly realized there is a real need in our society right now at a time when you could be recording me on the internet right now and having me up 30 seconds later with a video that may or may not be accurate of what's happening in this event, and have a very different view being portrayed of you. And it can happen in your career, it can happen to your company, and certainly the effects of that are going to be felt in your culture. So I want to talk to you about fireproofing. And it's the term that I use that well, if I'm talking about arsonists, we need to fireproof yourself from the arsonist, because I truly believe at this time you're at risk. You're always at risk of having someone say something bad about you, right? We've known that since we were in kindergarten. Somebody will say something mean. But with arsonists, they tend to be highly intelligent, highly competitive. People that, frankly, may want your job. They may want your clients. They may want to see your business go out of business because they're a competitor. And some of them may not care how they do it. They may sabotage your work like I found, or they may say negative things about you, or you may just have competitors that are tough, that are doing things right, and you need to up your game. So I'm going to talk about 8 things, and it's on the handout in front of you, of things that you can do to fireproof your career and your company. And I'm going to walk through those just a little bit. And again, some of these are fairly intuitive. Number 1, be your best. We're in a very competitive world right now. You know it, and I know it, that you're being competed against not only locally but internationally with the world of Amazon. Somebody can, you've got to consider what your pricing is, what your marketing is, not only for the person next door, down the street, but also throughout the world. And so having that level, acknowledging that you're in a tough competition in your industry is key. 2, building your team. One of the most important things you can do in your culture is have people that are a good fit. And at a time when we are at 3.6% unemployment, you are likely losing some great people, and you're then scrambling to get some people of just as good a quality. And I would urge you, again, to up your game when it comes to hiring. What types of questions are you asking? Are you looking for people that are team players, that have a strong track record of building camaraderie? Or are you taking whoever you can get in as quickly as possible? Especially in this job market, look for quality, and if you have to have a vacancy for a little while, suffer that rather than having an arsonist. Number 3, you need to tell your story. How many people are pleased with what their company is doing? I mean, really happy about what their company is doing on social media? Some. How many people aren't doing social media? When I say Facebook, things like that, getting your message out, your website, etc. How many feel that they're not doing social media well in their organizations? Yeah. There's a lot of companies that aren't. At this time, get your social media right and begin to tell your story. Not only for now, but at some point, you may find yourself in a crisis. Businesses every day find themselves with challenges. You look through the Fortune 500, what we've seen with CEO after CEO resigning, or scandals, things like that. And I'm not saying y'all are going to be dealing with scandals, but something may come up where you've got to explain yourself. Why your business did something the way it did, or why you hired somebody that you did. Answering those types of questions and building up that well of support, having the opportunity for people to know who you are before a problem arises is going to be key to you. 4, know your terrain. When you're in an organization, know what your culture is. Learn very quickly. I walked into about the most bizarre circumstance that you can imagine, where my boss is basically wondering why I had gotten through the hiring process and whether it was a smart move for me to be there that day. But not everybody's going to have that situation, but they may have a situation of finding themselves in a situation of learning something that may be uncomfortable or wrong that's going on in the organization, and trying to figure out, do I say something? And if I do, am I going to be here the next day? Because some organizations with strong cultures are going to address issues, especially ones where it may be something that could get into the press or could become public in some way. They'll address that, put out the fire. Others, and I talk about a bunch of them in my book, if you bring up the issue, you've got a chance of losing your job because maybe they didn't want that issue to be known. So know your terrain, and then certainly within your community as business owners, know your terrain as well to be able to respond in the right way, to have the contacts with elected officials, regulatory agencies, that type of thing, if you ever do have a challenge. 5, I encourage you to know your blind spots. And when I say that, when I entered the firm, the company I talk about in my book, I was confident. I've dealt with the top levels of government in my life, building relationships with congressional leaders, senators, governors. I know a lot of people, and I thought I knew everything about relationships, and smart guy, knew what I was doing, could handle just about anything. And what I learned was I was pretty naive in how I was reading my management. That I surely thought, if they're telling me that they've got a saboteur within their organization and they're telling me that, surely they're going to do something when I raise a concern. Or certainly when, for crying out loud, when they're bothering somebody's wife, you think that might raise a few concerns. But in the end, if your organization is telling you that they can't fire somebody, believe them. Because there's probably a good reason why they can't get them out of there. And I talk about that in terms of those blind spots when you're hiring. Having more people involved in your hiring process rather than just 1 or 2. Have people be able to look at somebody, and men and women, we view people very differently, don't we? I know my wife can size up another lady in a conversation and have a very different view than I have. Do that in your hiring process as well, in terms of getting more people involved, and you've got a chance to lower your risk of having a cultural issue. Number 6, let me ask you this question. In 2 sentences, could you describe to me what your organization's culture is? Okay, not too many hands up. Maybe that's an obscure question. But there's a lot of companies these days, and especially smaller ones, where the owners are busy just simply getting stuff done, where employees may not know exactly what the owner stands for or what the rules of the game are, and we get so busy doing what we're doing that some risk can come up in that we have employees that don't know what game they're playing. Or you may have managers that, in absence of a culture, may be doing whatever they think is right, and it may be way off from what an owner of a company may want to do. I would urge you, no matter how small you are in terms of your organization, get the culture right. Know what you stand for, what you tolerate, and certainly send that on to your employees, because they need to understand what the rules are if they're going to play the game properly. Number 7, is it you that's the problem? Now, Sean joked about the arsonist in the office and the arsonist in the room. I brought this through, and we're not going to have time today, but spoke to an IT group the other week and brought them through some exercises of essentially identifying the arsonist, and we did a blind survey of saying, here's certain behaviors that you want to look out for. And it was kind of fascinating. Most people were joking about it and saying, okay, the guy next to me is the problem, et cetera, et cetera. I got through with my presentation, was walking out, and a guy said, you know what? I think I'm one of them. It's kind of good to know whether you've got the challenges, and you may be one of the biggest causes of your culture having a problem. And I can't go through them all. I have 20 things in the book that you may want to review. But not only can you spot them through looking at a list like that, but also look inward. And it's a heck of a good exercise to go through to find out, that the suit kind of fits on this. And finally, stand up and stand strong. We are at a very strange time in our culture. There are multiple generations that are right now having a lot of societal changes. Can you all feel it with what's going on in society, whether it's in politics or discussions about gender, and we had the Me Too movement, and just last week read a story, folks may have seen this, they're discussing in Great Britain the potential banning of handshakes in the workplace because they're not sure of where to draw the line in terms of contact between colleagues, and could this count as harassment? This is a confusing time. I'm not a hugger, so I never crossed that line. I'm just not a huggy guy. But when we're talking about handshakes, things are getting more than a little bit confusing. But what your employees want, what you should demand, and what you should stand up for is creating that culture where every employee feels welcome, where you have a good understanding that you have told your employees exactly what they should expect, and that you, if somebody crosses the line, if you have an arsonist, if you have somebody who's essentially going against the values of your organization, that there's going to be some sort of correction that takes place. And these days, there are so many concerns about lawsuits. And, what if somebody posts something, a disgruntled employee, what if they post something on Facebook? All these different concerns. I've written this book to essentially say, folks, stand up for what you believe in your organizations. It's going to be the right thing. You want people to be ethical. You want them to treat your customers with respect. You want your handshake to be your word. Well, and a contract too, but your handshake to matter. You want these things that are part of your culture. But if you're not standing for it, you can expect that you may have problems down the line. You may not always, but don't be surprised when they happen. So I've written an unusual book. It's about my experience, my wild ride through about the craziest place you can ever imagine. I'm still looking for somebody, and I haven't gone into a lot of detail today because it might creep you out just a little bit, or a lot. But I've written both what I think is a pretty darn funny tale, but a cautionary tale about what can happen in the workplace. And I talk about probably the most miserable experience of my life, in that when I lost my job, I've been in a very niche field. And going into those job interviews after you lose your job with a story that certainly book-worthy, but will light a hiring manager's hair on fire as I tell it to them, not conducive to finding that next job. And I will tell you, it's been a challenge. There's been some sleepless nights, a lot of them. The financial burden that starts ticking up just a little bit, and a little bit of stress that goes with that. But I will tell you, as somebody who has had their work out for about 3 weeks on Amazon, it is amazing what you do when you stick your neck out and say, I've got something I can contribute. The emails and the random phone calls, because I put my number in my book. I wanted to hear from people that may want consulting services or something like that. The random calls, some of them teary, from people that are saying, you know what? You might have just saved my career, because I'm in a job where I've had no idea how to deal with this, and you just helped me figure out what I need to do. In one case, it's been to evacuate the company. In the other case, the person now has some peace about at least how to handle the situation. Getting contacted by a couple of CEOs of organizations that are saying, I've read your book, and again, I don't know how they heard of it, but read your book, we've got some challenges here. Can you help us? Because we need to do the right thing. We want to turn our culture into the best, and we think you can help us. And I say all that for one reason. I've told you about a tough time for me with my career, seeing it just blow up in front of me. And it was hard. But I know that there's somebody in this audience who's going through something in their life. Maybe you've got a serious health problem. Or you may be working with Hazel. Or you may be having a relationship go south. I don't know what it is. But I know this. It is amazing what happens at some points in life when that situation that you think is going to take you down spins around and turns into one of the most incredible opportunities you can ever imagine. Because I come to you today and say, if you're one of those people that's going through some of the tough, number one, life gets better. Number two, you may be able to shape other people's lives. And number three, that adversity that you go through may be shaping you for something you never imagined. I want to leave you with all of that today and urge you to do a few things. Number one, if you own a company or you're a manager, think through your culture. Are you doing it right? And if you need help, there's plenty of people that can help you. Number two, if you're an employee, do what you can to help your managers be the best. It may be a rough situation where you are right now, and if it is, be there to help them build something better. And number three, if you are in that tough situation, look for that silver lining and find that opportunity where you can impact others. And I can assure you, it's one heck of a feeling. That's all I've got today. Thank you so much.